It is beautiful if you make it so. That part that we have, our part as what some people call co-creator or co-operator, we really have the great opportunity, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is what it means to be a creator. How many of you know yourself to be a creator? And that life is beautiful if we make it so. How many of you know Reverend Edwina Gaines? Have any of you had the opportunity to experience her? She's a dynamic unity minister, speaker, teacher. She told me a story one day about a friend. She said she was traveling and speaking in a town, and she connected with an old friend. They had lunch together, and at the end of their lunch together, they said, let's stay in touch. And so they exchanged business cards. And when she got her friend's business card, behind her name, it had MSU. And she said, Marge, congratulations. I didn't know you got I guess this is a master's. I apologize. I don't know what it means. What is MSU? And her friend said, oh, honey, that just means I'm a master at making stuff up. Are you a master at making stuff up? Well, beyond making it so and being a maker stuff up, we are truly a creator. That wise prophet, Dr. Seuss, said, think left and think right, think low and think high. Oh, if you only think a thought, you can... Let me go see what Dr. Seuss said. Just seeing if you're listening. Dr. Seuss said, think left and think right, think low and think high. All the things you can think up if you only try. Beyond trying and beyond thinking, it's about being a creator. It's about knowing ourselves as, often we hear the word co-creator. I personally like the term co-operator better, that we're always cooperating with the laws of the universe. I remember when I went to the Grand Canyon and saw the sign that said, the law of gravity is strictly enforced here. Well, the law of gravity is always working the same everywhere, but there's certain places that we really need to know how it's worked and remembered. And it's a good reminder today about what it means to be a creator. In the Bible, in Genesis means beginning, and the book of Genesis begins with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The first thing that we're told about God or the nature of God is that God created, that God is the creative presence. And just a few lines down, we're told that we are created in the likeness and image of God. So essentially, we're also told that not only is God creative, but that we too are creative. That God is this immanent presence and is the power, the process, the energy of creation itself. And that same creative energy, that same creative power, that same creative presence is active within us. It's not only active within us, it is our very life, that we are an inherent, intricate part of this creative process. And so becoming aware of that is really helpful when it comes to creating the life that we would like to create. Matthew Fox said, creativity may be the nearest one-word definition we possess for the essence of our humanity, for the true meaning of soul. That if you think about it, we are always creating. We create children. There's a beautiful baby who just spoke right on cue. Is there any miracle any greater than a newborn baby? We create children, we create families, we create homes. We create blueprints, we create patterns, we create inventions. We create works of art, we create great music. We create companies or business, organizations. We create images, we create names for ourselves. We create ideas, plans, and goals. We create thoughts. We create things, we create beliefs, we create intentions. We create reasons, we create excuses. We create stories. Anybody got a story? We all create our own stories. We create masterpieces and we create messes. It's part of the human experience. We all do all of these things. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to meet Karen Joyce, who was the business partner of Mary Morrissey. And Karen lived in Oregon, and she came out to my church at the time, and I had the opportunity to meet with her and spend some time with her. And after our first meeting, she handed me her card, and behind her name were 3 letters, CPO. And I said, Karen, I'm not familiar with that. What does that mean? And she smiled, and she said, it's there to remind me that I am my Chief Possibility Officer. And I love that she always taught other people that you are your own Chief Possibility Officer, a CPO of your own life, that we're always creating. When we think about creating, we realize that it's a part of our nature and that there's tremendous power and responsibility. Last week I talked a little bit about what we call the Lord's Prayer. And I said it's interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, because as the story goes, those who Jesus handpicked as his students, as his followers, they ask him to teach them to pray. And at first glance, to us, it doesn't sound strange, but it was very strange because these were Jewish people who grew up in a Jewish religion, and prayer was an inseparable part of their life. It was part of their culture. It was part of their everyday routine. So they had been praying all of their lives. So what we have to believe is that when they said, teach us to pray, they were actually saying, teach us to communicate with your source, with our source. Teach us to communicate with God in such a way that our life can demonstrate the power and the presence of God the way we see it demonstrated in your life. Because what Jesus was always teaching is, he never said he was the exception. He always said that we're all sons and daughters of God. And he was teaching us to recognize his own power within ourselves. And so when he began to teach the Lord's Prayer, as we talked about last week, the first part of it is all about connecting to source. The Lord's Prayer, if you look at it, it really has 2 components. They're not 2 separate components. They're like 2 sides to one coin. They're like 2 halves of one thing that work together. That the Lord's Prayer is about source and expression of source. It's about the Creator and how we express the creative process in our life. And so last week, as I said, we talked about the power and the necessity for us to connect through our time of prayer and meditation, however we choose to do it, but just to center ourselves in the truth and the reality that we can never be disconnected from our source, however we can think ourselves apart. And so we remind ourselves and we reestablish ourselves in the connection. And then there's the line that goes that, as it is in heaven, so let it be on earth. This part in the prayer is considered the hinge. It's where it begins to turn, because the first half of the prayer is focusing on the source. And then there's this hinge statement. And then after that, what flows are practices for living. It's all about our daily bread. It is all about our debts and forgiveness. And it's about how we practice it in our daily life. And so it's source and the expression of source. And this middle part is really about us understanding the power of who we are as creators. Would you give me this first? There's 3 quotes that I wanted to share with you. The first one is by John Deming Crossan, who is, he was a former Irish Catholic priest. He's known as the foremost scholar on the New Testament. He's one of the co-founders of the Jesus Seminar. He has since been asked to leave the Catholic Church because of what he discovered and refused not to talk about it. And so he's a great person to study and to read his writing. And when he was talking about the Lord's Prayer, he said, "You have been waiting for God," Jesus said, "while God has been waiting for you. No wonder nothing is happening. You want God's intervention," he said, "while God wants your collaboration. God's kingdom is here, but only insofar as you accept it, enter it, live it, and thereby establish it." What we know and what we talk about a lot in Unity and in New Thought is the first place we establish it is in our own consciousness. is in our own awareness, that as we establish our own source connection, as we establish our own sense of who we are, we establish it in our own awareness, and then it begins to flow outward from there. The second slide, would you give me the next slide, is by Genevieve Baron, written in the early 1800s. She was or 1900s. She was a student of Judge Thomas Troward, who was a forethinker, so to speak, in New Thought. She said, "The power that brought you into existence did so for the purpose of expressing its limitless supply through you. There is no power on earth which can cut you off from your source except your own consciousness," our own thoughts. And the third one, I love this, is from the Tao Te Ching, which says, "When you look for it, there is nothing to see. When you listen for it, there is nothing to hear. But when you use it, it is inexhaustible." Maya Angelou said, "You can't use up creativity. The more you use it, the more you have." Eric Butterworth, a Unity minister and writer, said, "God can only do for us what God can do through us." You see, all of these things, what they're pointing to is that there is this power in this presence, this one that we may call God or all that is, our source. And then there is the capacity to express God. In Unity, we talk about good and evil not as two separate powers, but as two distinct ways on a spectrum of power that we can express power. You see that it is we, through our self-will, who choose whether we will use, it's like electricity. We may use this power to illuminate the building or to burn the building down. So it is with the one power of creation, that this power flows through us for purposes of creation and construction, or this power flows through us and it is up to us to use it. And if we so choose, we can certainly use it for purposes of destruction. And we see that, and what we believe to be true is that the only way we could use this power for destruction is when we have disconnected from our source. Because when we remember we're connected to source, when I remember that you, my brother, and you, my sister, are equal in all ways that I am, there is no way that I could wish anything for you that I would not wish for myself. That I could not place you outside of God's love and God's grace without placing my own self outside. And so these teachings are really powerful in helping us transform our life and in transforming our world. And so our goal then is to be a conscious creator, realizing that a creator is an expresser. It is one that expresses and experiences this power in this presence in a way that demonstrates love and vision and sacred action. And so there's an affirmation that we're working with today that says, "I am a conscious creator. I create with love and vision and sacred action." Would you say that with me? I am a conscious creator. I am a conscious creator. I create with love, vision, and sacred action. I create with love, vision, and sacred action. Have you ever scanned through your radio and almost every song you landed on, country, jazz, they're all singing about love? Can you think of how many songs are talking about love, or either wishing I had love, or not liking them because that love left me behind? That love, 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 we hear it all the time. That this energy that we know is love, and the scriptures say that God is love, that when we say love, we're talking about this life-affirming presence that values life, that connects life, that nurtures life. That is the power in the presence of love. And so a daily practice we can ask ourselves is, when I am creating, am I creating from an intention and a foundation and a place of love? What is my intention? And am I creating from a place of love? And it's, in some ways, it's easy to think about that in our interactions with other people. Are they loving? Are they not loving? But it has to get down into all the nooks and crannies of our life to be loving. I'll give you an example. The last place that I lived in the Seattle area, it was a little town called Fife, like Barney Fife, F-I-F-E. And I moved into a neighborhood. I loved the neighborhood. I loved the house. But it had the smallest backyard I had ever seen. I mean, it was a little fenced-in backyard that was probably about as maybe this little square here. Now, growing up in eastern North Carolina, you know one thing about this part of the country is we have land. I mean, I had woods behind my house. We had a ford in the woods. I'm used to land. That is not a backyard, excuse me. So when I moved, now incidentally, mine's even smaller, so I'm not sure what that's about. But when I first moved into this house, it had a backyard about that big, and it was in the winter, and it was cool and rainy in that part of the country, so the grass had grown up, and it just looked ugly. There's no other way to say it. It was just ugly. But I thought, well, I'm not even going to worry about it. I moved in. I liked everything else. And then spring came around, and I'd put my little dog out to go potty in the backyard, and I'd look out, and I would just think, oh, that is the ugliest backyard I've ever seen. And I just found myself, as it began to get a little warmer, I just felt bad. I thought, I wish I had a nice backyard. I just have an ugly backyard, and it's so little. All that stuff. And so one day, when I was sitting in my meditation time, I heard, what would you create in your backyard if you loved it? I'm like, where did that come from? I wasn't even thinking about that. Well, that's the point. I wasn't thinking. What would you create in your backyard if you loved it? And to me, it was so hopeless, I really couldn't even get going with it. So the next thought that came to me is, what would you do to that backyard, Darlene, if your mother lived in this house? Now my wheels started going. Because I love my mother. And if for some reason my mother were living there, instead of me, not with me, but if my mother were living there, I would want her to have a beautiful backyard. I'd want her to have a little garden. I'd want her to have a place to sit. And so I talked to Tia about it, and we decided, that's not going to be that hard. We can put some brick pavers around here. And I'm used to a big old garden, but it didn't have to be that way. We put in a big box garden. It took about 3 or 4 weekends, and we transformed that backyard into a beautiful place. By the next summer, I actually went to Hawaii the next summer and covered for someone. I was gone for a month, and I had someone that came and house sit. It was another minister. And the one thing, when she wrote a thank you card, she said, I loved sitting in your backyard sanctuary. She called it a sanctuary. But you see, as long as I was stuck in this is an ugly, pitiful excuse of a backyard, I was not going to create anything. And so it had to reach me to say, what would you create if you loved it? Even then, I couldn't get it, so it had to say, what would you create if it was for your mother, if your mother lived here? So you can ask yourself, when you find yourself in those places that we're complaining or we feel like we're having to accept something that we don't like, and yet we have some responsibility. We have the opportunity to make a difference. Rather than focusing on why we don't like it and what's not working, to ask ourselves, if I loved it, what would I create? Because when that power of love begins to flow through us, you see, the next thing about creation that flows immediately after love is vision. Vision. Because when I could see through my mother being there, or I could begin to see, well, if I love this space, then a vision would begin to take place. I love shows like Extreme Makeover. These places where they go in and it just looks terrible, or whether it's a restaurant or whatever it is. My first ministry in Lawrence, Kansas, when I started the ministry, so many things it just really needed a lot of love. And so we created a supreme makeover. And we adopted places and we just transformed that church. But it took vision. The power of vision is something that each of us have. But oftentimes, we get our vision all turned around. How many of you remember Art Linkletter? Yeah, we're aging ourselves. There's a few over here like, who? We'll tell the young people after service, but you should look him up on YouTube. Art Linkletter used to interview kids, and do you remember the name of his show? Kids Say the Darndest Things. He was hilarious, and at times he would work with Bill Cosby. But Art Linkletter would ask children questions in a way that just drew out their innocence, and it was always funny. I recently saw a clip where he had 3 different children, and he asked the first one, he said, "If you were a fireman, what's the first thing you would do?" And the little boy said, "Pull up my pants." He asked the next little girl, he said, "If you were president, what would you do?" She said, "Keep my mouth shut." And then he asked the third little girl, he said, "How do you spell my name?" "Art." And she said, "R-A-T." Children have just a beautiful way of seeing the world, but they also turn things around, because R-A-T is not exactly A-R-T. It's the same letters switched around. Well, I discovered something very powerful about our creative power. You see, the same words that spell creator spell reactor. And so often in life, through our vision, we are reacting rather than creating. You see, just like this room, there is a thermostat and a thermometer. They both are in relationship with temperature. One of them sets the temperature. One of them reads the temperature. A creator sets the vision, sets the environment, holds the space, sees the truth, sees first, makes the connection first. A reactor simply reads the environment, reacts to the environment. And we all do some of both of those. But in taking back our gift and our responsibility of being this conscious cooperator, this creator, it is to place ourselves in love and to always remember and ask, am I being a creator right now, or am I simply being a reactor? We know we're reacting when we're blaming situations and circumstances out here. We know we're reacting when we feel like we are just totally disempowered. But sometimes it can even be more subtle than this. When we find ourselves self-sabotaging. Anybody self-sabotage? At least we know it. That's the first step, is being aware of it. I have a prayer partner that we pray. We've prayed every week together for over 10 years now. And about a year and a half ago, she had moved to Santa Barbara, and she said, "I need to have a housemaid. It's just, I know it's what I need to do. I want to do it. So let's join together and pray and know that I'm going to attract someone to move in and rent a room for me." Well, week after week, we talk about it, and she had met with people, and nothing was working. But when she'd talk about it, I could hear in her voice a lot of resentment and frustration around feeling like she had to do this. And so I asked her one day, I asked her that, I said, "Do you feel clear that this is what you want to do, or do you feel, mixed feelings and mixed emotions?" She said, "You're exactly right. I want to do it, but I don't want to do it." And so that's what she was manifesting. It wasn't coming, it wasn't happening. Part of her was still reacting to that idea. She wasn't yet in a place to create. And so I asked her, I said, "Can you imagine a scenario that could be so wonderful that you actually enjoyed having a person live with you?" And she began to think about that, and she thought, yeah, sure, there could be a scenario that could actually be a blessing, that rather than taking something away, it was a true gift. And so she began to look at it that way. The very next week when we called, she said, "I found someone. It's a mother with a little baby, and the baby's name was Grace." Now, what you have to know about my friend is she loves children and babies. And so this mother and her children blessed my friend's home. They added value. They loved it for about a year, and then they left. When they left, my friend, prayer partner then, didn't even skip a beat. She was no longer now reacting. All she said was, "Join me in praying about this, because I can't wait to see the scenario now. What gets created in this situation now?" Well, this time she had people interviewing. She interviewed several people in Santa Barbara, and the one she chose, she said, "You're never going to believe this. I have a Buddhist monk living with me who in her former life was a chef, and she asked me if she could cook for me." Hello. And she loves pets and said, if you're ever gone, I'll be glad to watch your pets. And my friend has 2 big dogs, and she said, my dogs are like little lambs beside her. So now she has a Buddhist monk who is a chef who babysits her dogs, and they act like lambs with her. That's being in the creative, really being connected to love, into that big picture, and not reacting. Light, would you give me that song? And so when we're creating, we're always asking, am I grounded in love? Is my vision a vision of reacting or of truly being a conscious cooperator in creating? And then that third step is what I call sacred action or inspired action. It's taking the steps. This is an important week in our country because we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his work. And if you have not yet seen the movie Selma, I encourage you to see it. But there's an individual that took inspired action to make change. And the beautiful thing about a spiritual community that I've learned is one of the greatest things we experience together is a time, hopefully, of inspiration. We find it inspiring to be here on Sunday. We find it inspiring to connect together. But inspiration without action is merely entertainment. Inspiration with inspired action equals transformation. Inspiration with inspired action equals change, equals evolution. This is where we all have the opportunity to ask, what is my next step? Whatever it is in your life. What one action should I take? Maybe you work with a spiritual coach. Maybe you have a prayer partner. Maybe you have a friend. But somehow you keep yourself moving forward. It's not only about being inspired, but it's about inspired action that changes our world. Margaret Mead, the great anthropologist, said, never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, that is the only thing that ever has. And so this week we take that step, connection, and now focusing on creation. And the song that we've selected is from Ricky Byers, Dr. Michael Beckwith's wife, that says, use me. Many of you may know this. I'm going to invite you to sing it with me, and it goes like this. Use me